You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality. Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnstone, and this week I have with me Connor.
Hello.
And Mansoor.
Hello.
And we're kind of following up an episode that Connor and I did a while back, but it's sort of its own thing as well, I suppose. We're going to look at Dalek Universe. So we've obviously already touched on this kind of thing because we discussed the Fourth Doctor Adventures season with Jane Slavin and Anne Kelso, who became Anya Kingdom, and we had Jane Slavin on to talk about that particular series. So we're picking up at the next bit, which was Dalek Universe, which was, I think it's fair to say, something that just wouldn't have existed without COVID, because they managed to get David Tennant for long enough to do an entire series with him. And it brought back Anya Kingdom, and by all accounts, the scripts were written fairly quickly, which, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't actually show in any of these episodes. And yeah, we got this sort of really interesting, very linked to 60s Doctor Who, as well as that season of the Fourth Doctor Adventures series, that it kind of just plays around in the, I guess, Terry Nation sandpit for a little bit. We have mechanoids, we have Movellans, we have Visions even. So it's sort of I think it's still quite a unique thing from Big Finish, really. It's kind of, I guess, new Doctor Who series 4.5. What if David Tennant had done that fourth series? And yeah, it is different, it's interesting, and I don't think Big Finish have really done anything that's particularly comparable to it. So I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to the days of lockdowns and COVID and us wondering what was going to happen next with Anya Kingdom, and just sort of ask you what your initial reaction to finding out that Dalek Universe was going to be a thing was. So, Connor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was thrilled because, like, for years, would have David Tennant's first one was something like 2015 with Big Finish, and he seemed to sort of come back every 2 years to 18 months or so, just to do another 3 episodes. It's actually very strange, thinking back on it now, because he started off with TV companions, and then two very exceptionally busy people in the form of Billy Piper and Catherine Tate came in to do them at the same time. And then they've sort of backed out of it a little bit more recently. They're not just as prolific as David Tennant has become. But I was delighted. I was thrilled to have, my childhood Doctor back for a full series. I'd wanted... I'm a huge fan of the Eighth Doctor Adventures and the box set runs like Doom Coalition and stuff. So I'd wanted something like that with Tennant for ages, and was thrilled when this came along. I thought at the time that oh yes, excellent, David Tennant has come back to do a full series of Doctor Who. That's never going to happen again. But even now, the 60th anniversary has slightly overtaken that, just very slightly. And he still, like he still hasn't gone away. He's still knocking about in some form in the Doctor Who universe. So at the time, it was really, really exciting to get this big blockbustery, action-filled 10th Doctor Series 5. Doubly exciting. I don't think I had heard the Anne Kelso run at the time, but I made it a very urgent priority once this was announced.
And I think it's absolutely great that we have that link to that series of Fourth Doctor adventures, and it is continuing the story of a very interesting character. We got the name Anya Kingdom, and we got the obvious link to Sarah Kingdom, but we never actually found out what that link was, which is obviously something that we'll discuss as we go on in this episode. What about you, Mansoor? What was your sort of initial reaction to there's going to be Dalek Universe?
Yeah, also very interested, just because, like what David Tennant had done for Big Finish until then had been more sporadic, and it was sort of uncertain about whether that would be an ongoing thing or whether we were just lucky to get a few stories. So getting a lot more in one go, but then also, it being a kind of a sort of audio series or audio season, similar to what the 11th Doctor Chronicles is doing at the moment. That's quite nice to have a kind of set of stories that a set of episodes that tell one long form story, like the 8th Doctor box sets like Doom Coalition and around that sort of era are another good example. Like, having said that, and we'll probably get into this in the follow up episode, but there's a lot of connections with previous stuff, like not just the Fourth Doctor adventures. There's that also connecting to the Dalek's master plan and all of that. So I remember thinking that was an interesting choice when this was announced, that you've got David Tennant, you're putting something out during lockdown, and you'd imagine that they'd really push that as a bit of a high-profile release to get new listeners and go beyond the regular audience. And I think they did like vinyl releases for these to make it a bit more special as well. So they're doing that, but then to fully get the significance of what's going on here, you do need to have seen a TV story that no longer exists and have listened to a whole load of Fourth Doctor adventures as well. So yeah, I remember thinking that was an interesting choice.
It's one that I think paid off as well. I mean, I would suspect that it probably was a Big Finish jumping on point for some people. It's maybe, I don't know. I guess that there was some David Tennant beforehand, as we've said, so maybe that'll have been a jumping on point. But I'd be very curious to know if anybody did kind of come on at Dalek Universe and go, well, hang on a minute, what are these references to Kemble? Who is this Anya that the Doctor knows? All this kind of thing.
I think the Anya Doctor dynamic is the biggest thing that feels like I'd advise someone to listen to the First Doctor adventures first, not just because of spoilers, but because of just how it works in terms of their narrative. I think the Daleks' master plan references, you can kind of pick that up from context or kind of think about it as an off-screen adventure. So I feel like that's maybe not quite as crucial. But yeah, I'd definitely advise people to listen to the Anne Kelso stories first.
That and the fact that they're just so damn good as well. It's a really, really good series. It's really worth looking at. And like I say, we've talked about it on this podcast before, and Connor and I, we did find that there was an awful lot to enjoy in there. It's a really good run, and the one thing we kind of said was, well, there isn't enough of this character, this Anne/Anya. So I was really glad that we got more. I was really glad that we were able to continue Anya Kingdom's story with, her as the companion to David Tennant in an entire new series. So let's start discussing that series. So we're going to discuss the first two sets in this episode, And then we're going to follow it up in the next few weeks with discussion of the episodes from the final set. And we're just going to take a look at the sort of story arc as a whole, releases that tied into it, that kind of thing. So the first story was Buying Time, which, it's part one of two. It was always advertised as part one of two. I remember on its announcement, John Dorney said something along the lines of, "It's great, I've got to write a proper David Tennant two-parter." And that's exactly what it is. It's a proper new series pace, exciting, interesting two-parter, and it does deal with the Doctor-companion relationship. Again, another very new series thing. It kind of wasn't dealt with so much during the Fourth Doctor adventures, because the Fourth Doctor kind of just left Anya behind because she just reminded him of Van Kelso. And it picks up there, and I'm really glad it does pick up there. It's not a case of brushing it under the carpet and going, "Oh, that was lifetimes ago, we can be friends now." It's something that's genuinely carried through quite a few episodes of this, actually. It's not really until The Lost, which we'll be discussing later on, that things sort of settle down a tad. So, Connor, do you want to talk to us about Buying Time?
Yes, I feel it always sort of has to be taken as a two-parter with the wrong woman. Buying Time, it does a really good job of reintroducing us to Anya and Mark and the 10th Doctor. And it sort of takes it in stages a little bit. And I like the way that's broken down, that you get that little bit of time with Anya at the beginning before she meets the Doctor. And they get a little bit of interaction, and then eventually Mark turns up to complete the set. So it's a good story. It's good to hear a little bit more of Anya's day-to-day life among the SSS, because we don't really get any of that, I suppose, in the Fourth Doctor run. We get her as Anne, and we get her as the sort of brainwashed Anya, but we don't really get any of Anya on just an ordinary day. So this spends a little bit of time setting that up, and it's good to get that. It's good to get a little bit of a sense of who she is and what she does when she's not being used to take over the Earth. It's the build up to the reveal is cool, that they're on Myra, and what has destroyed the crew of this ship that they're investigating is the Vizians. This is one of those moments where you really do have to have done your homework with the series. Like, there's no way you're going to have any idea what's going on if you haven't heard or read the Daleks' master plan. Although I think they probably do a fair enough job of giving over information that these are invisible creatures and the Doctor's met them before. Like, there's nothing to it beyond that. But I think it's fair to say that it's better if you have done the Daleks' master plan in some form or another. Yeah, it moves along. It's sort of a tale of two halves, because you get about half of it set on Myra, and it's this desperate, survival thing, and then it leads more on into setting up the wrong woman. The biggest thing about this episode, the thing that everyone thinks about when they think of Buying Time, is the cliffhanger. Like, it's that absolutely jaw-dropping moment right at the very end where he regenerates. How many regeneration scenes has David Tennant done? I would genuinely love to know. Because I remember listening to this the first time and being absolutely gobsmacked. There's no way they're doing this. It's not happening. They haven't brought David Tennant back for a series just to regenerate him. And then it comes out and it's this woman that we've never met before. It's not Matt Smith. It's someone entirely different. So that's I admire the sheer audacity of doing that in the first episode, and I'm genuinely amazed and impressed that the BBC allowed them to do that to one of Doctor Who's biggest assets in the form of David Tennant and the 10th Doctor.
I suppose it helps that it was all wrapped up within the next hour.
Yes.
Imagine that I tried to carry it in between sets. Like that I reckon is when the BBC might have got a bit grumpy. Like, no, you can't create another 11th Doctor. We've got one of those and we quite like him.
It's one of those things as well that like a lot of online news outlets would have picked up on. David Tennant has regenerated again. There's a new Doctor.
Yeah, you can just see the mirror being all over it, can't you?
It's one of those things that would just cause a headache for the behind the scenes team. Because I know the news, I know online news sources like to do that with Big Finish and pretend, put stuff up in the headlines. Doctor Who just regenerated David Tennant, and they don't mention that it's an audio drama until like the 5th paragraph or something.
Yeah, it happens quite a lot. Like, classic Doctor Who actor is coming back on audio that they've been doing for the last 20 years. Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, Paul McGann is the Doctor again. Is a favourite. Anyway, Mansoor, what were your thoughts on Buying Time?
Yeah, I agree in terms of it being a good. And again, it feels like the format of a season. It's an episode that does a lot of good introduction of our main cast. The big cliffhanger. I guess it's if, like I said, David Tennant's Doctor has done a lot of regenerations. Some of them real, some of them fake or with get out clauses. So if you're looking at this story in isolation, I think it's executed really well in a quite exciting and compelling way. It's just when you look back at that wider context of, okay, it's another one of these, that it loses a little bit of the edge. And for me, and also because of the resolution, I know a lot of people would have been upset if they paid for a David Tennant series and there were several episodes without David Tennant in it. But I think that would have been quite interesting to have had this play out at least for an episode or two, just to string things along a little bit, kind of doing a bit of a rerun of what they did in the comics with the fake 8th Doctor regeneration. Having said that, like whatever my thoughts are about the cliffhanger, I think the rest of the episode is really solid, and it does, like I say, a good job of not just reintroducing characters and plot points and where they are and the setup for the series, but just giving a few nice moments to establish character and dynamics, and even if you haven't heard the Anne Kelso stories, just in the way that the Doctor reacts to meeting Anya and Mark again, you get a sense of those dynamics, even if they're not all spelled out in black and white. So yeah, I think strong opening to the series.
Well, we'll move, as the episode itself did, straight onto The Wrong Woman. So we've got that bonkers cliffhanger. We've got that David Tennant is regenerating. What the hell is going on? Like, he's on the cover for the second set, so surely he's not gone for good. And I genuinely love where this went, and it did catch me off guard. I did not see this coming at all. Sort of the big reveal. But of course, it's not the Doctor, it's the monk, or rather the nun, a female regeneration of the monk. This was just fantastic. This was a great idea, and obviously another sort of thing from Dalek Masterplan. The monk was in Dalek Masterplan, so it all fits in with kind of this 60s Dalek story theme that they've got going on. So we'll move straight on to The Wrong Woman. Connor, go for it.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. It's one of the very best reveals Big Finish have ever pulled off. Now, I think the reason this works so well is because there's a lot of misdirection going on elsewhere in the story. So throughout the second part of Buying Time and through the first half of this story, there's a lot of misdirection as to who the villain is, because I'm pretty sure that the intention was for us as listeners to think that this was a story involving one or more incarnations of the Master. So as soon as Mark Gatiss was put on the cover of this box set, I think everyone's mind suddenly leaped to, oh, what if this is David Tennant versus the Unbound Master? That would be a cool thing to do. As you're going through the story, you get these little hints and stuff, like there's mentions of time breaking down. There's it's the time tunnels have a TARDIS component built into them, and the Doctor recognizes this as a component from a TARDIS. And of course, you have Mark Gatiss sitting in the middle of it all, playing this sinister time engineer figure who, you're definitely meant to think that's the Master, in a sort of Quicksilver's in one division sort of way, I think. The other element of it is you also have the character who is ultimately revealed to be the monk in disguise, or the nun in disguise. I'm pretty sure you're meant to think the pastor with the holy book is also the Master, or you're meant to maybe wonder if that's like the Doctor Who magazine pastor version. I think there's a version of the Master in the 8th Doctor comics or 6th Doctor comic. I can't quite remember which. I haven't read it, but I know there's a version of the Master in those comics who presents himself as a sort of religious pastor. So, you've got these two figures running around who could maybe be the Master, and then the TARDIS component turns up, and the Doctor's never met the Mark Gatiss version before, so you're obviously meant to think that's him, that's why he doesn't recognize him. But then it just comes out of left field, and all these little hints have been dropped, and you get this reveal that no, this is a new version of the meddling monk. And it's as I say, it's one of the very best reveals Big Finish have ever pulled off. You get it. You start wondering and hoping maybe 30 seconds before she reveals it that this is who she is, and then she drops the line, this time I'm no monk. I was like, yes. I'm so glad to hear that. I was so delighted to hear that character again. It's brilliant that they managed to get David Tennant, with it as the 10th Doctor, with another Time Lord villain who's not the Master, and you get that. Because there's always been slightly more of a chummy feel between the Doctor and the monk. Like in Dalek's Master Plan, when he turns up, the two of them just have, like William Hartnell and Peter Butterworth, just have a bit of banter, about where they are. Oh, how's things these days? Like, that's the way that conversation feels. So the Doctor gets a Time Lord he's ostensibly more friendly with, and he spends a good deal of the climax to all of this trying to convince the monk to stay with him and help him. And it's brilliant. It plays out really well, and the sort of the chemistry and the interaction and engagement between the 10th Doctor and the monk. I really like it. I think it works really well. You do get that sort of slightly Ravagers-esque thing about time breaking down and all the different, like there's Romans and dinosaurs and stuff that reminds me, because I think they come out similar sort of time, that reminds me very strongly of Ravagers. But that side of the story just washes over me. I'm always desperate to get back to the Doctor and the Nun, because that part of it is just so brilliant. I really love this story. I love the whole two-parter. It was done so well.
Yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant couple of episodes, and a really, really, really good way to launch a series as well, I think. It does kind of throw us straight into this kind of idea of the 10th Doctor before the Time War. It's the 10th Doctor playing around in Classic Who, isn't it? Specifically Classic Who by Terry Nation. And I think this story does an absolutely brilliant job of just bridging that Classic Who and New Who divide that, to be honest, I think is a lot smaller than many people believe it is, but it's certainly balanced really well here. Mansoor, what about you?
Yeah, I agree that the big thing that stood out to me in this one was the new version of the monk, and I totally agree about it. Quite rightly recapturing that 60s Dalek Master Plan time meddler dynamic that the monk had with the first Doctor, and doing that really well. And I think the performance for the monk or the nun is absolutely excellent as well. I think the interconnectivity with all those other things that we talked about, like Master Plan and Fourth Doctor Adventures, I think generally those work really smoothly with this series. The one bit of Big Finish interconnectivity that I think gets in the way for me a little bit here is kind of totally glossing over the events of To the Death and the end of the Lucy Miller audio stories. And yeah, because that felt like it should have totally permanently shifted that chummy dynamic between the monk and the doctor. I don't know if I've caught up with every appearance of the monk in various other things, because I think Rufus Hound's monk has turned up in quite a few places. So maybe I need to catch up with those, but I don't feel like we've had a proper kind of acknowledgement of that, or something that resets their dynamic to what it was in the past. Having said that, like I said, that's not a problem with Dalek Universe. That's just like a kind of character continuity thing that stands out a little bit for me when you're looking at, like, Big Finish across decades of stuff. But yeah, as a story in its own right, I thought this was excellent, and I would very much like to see this regeneration of the monk again sometime.
The Lucy Miller thing, it's interesting because not that it's yes, I agree that it's weird that it's not mentioned. I think there has been a confrontation between the Eighth Doctor and the monk since then. It's in Doom Coalition. The Rufus Hound monk is in it, and that there is a. I don't know if Lucy. I can't. I don't think Lucy's mentioned explicitly, but there is a. The Doctor's very antagonistic towards him throughout that, and other characters going, "Oh, why are you being like that?" And like, he knows what he did. That's the Doctor's response. Is he
Yeah,
knows.
that sounds familiar. There was also the locum doctors, which I think happens. It's sort of out of sequence. Like the locum doctors is after To the
Yes.
Death for the
Yeah.
monk, but before for the doctor. So that obviously there's no resolution or moving on because it's out of sequence. But that was an interesting picking up of that thread as well. And I think that was more the monk out for revenge. So at least that was acknowledging that the dynamic had shifted a bit. Because the monk had previously never really gone after the doctor in the way that the master would do. It was more that the monk was up to something and the doctor
Their
stumbled
paths just
into it.
cross. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also the thing in this story as well, which I really like. I think it's a great character development for the monk, and it does sort of help to reconcile their different incarnations turning up in all these different places, possibly out of sequence. Is that their timeline sort of is falling apart, that they have rewritten time so many times that their own history no longer makes sense. And like, I think the order of their incarnation shifts. In this story, the nun has never heard of the Time War, has no idea what it's about. But when she comes back, she's in one of the Missy stories. She knows, she does know about the Time War. She comes after Rufus Hound's monk. She's his next incarnation, and he has sort of escaped from the Time War already. So, like, that can go some way as to helping with it as well. In that, maybe in this monk's timeline, the Lucy Miller stuff never happened, and then maybe in other parts of their timeline, it has happened. It's like the monk is now a non-linear sort of entity, which I think it's a great character development for them. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I suppose it's compounded by the fact that the place, as far as I can remember, that we last left both of the sort of current active monks at Big Finish was they were travelling together.
I would like a sitcom spin-off with the two monks.
Yes, it would be brilliant. I'm at least hoping they show up again in the forthcoming Missy set, which seems to be the monk's second home at the moment. He's been in every Missy set. I mean, I only listened to Missy last week.
He's been
Yes,
in
he
them
was
all.
in every Missy set, wasn't he?
Yeah.
The Rufus Hound monk. So yeah, there's definitely room for more monkery, and I love the fact that they are left, the monk and the nun, I suppose, are left travelling together at the end of the last Missy set, and like that does feel like a sitcom-y spin-off series, and we're sort of light-hearted but serious series of something Big Finish do very well. I'm thinking of Missy, or I'm thinking of the Lone Centurion sets and that kind of thing. It'd be great to get something like that.
I would like to see that, but they should do the Jackie Tyler adventures as a sitcom format before getting to that.
What if Jackie Tyler ended up travelling with the two monks?
Don't
No.
say it, because then Big
No,
Finish will use it for free. Like we could pitch that.
So the third story in the first set is the House of Kingdom, where, well, first of all, the wrong woman ends on a cliffhanger, and I'm loving the fact that I think every single story in Dalek Universe does, actually, which it's another nice little nod to 60s Doctor Who, that sort of first season where absolutely everything ended on some kind of cliffhanger. Usually the cliffhanger was, oh, we've landed somewhere strange. It's like, yep, that's kind of the nature of the show, Doctor. But everything does end on a cliffhanger, so we get one here, and it's picked up pretty quickly, obviously, in the House of Kingdom, where an awful lot happens. We finally get a little bit more about Anya. We learn a bit about her character, what her link to Anya, to Sarah Kingdom is, to Brett Vian is, that kind of thing. And we get Kevin McNally playing her grandfather, who's a brilliant character. Really, really sort of good to get more of the Kingdom family, and he is the character that kind of links it all together. It's certainly a little bit more low key after the sort of big bombastic two-parter at the beginning, but it's a great little episode with added mechanoids as well. So Connor, go ahead.
Well, this is great because it's the first time that we dig into Anya's personal history. So, like I said, you've had her sort of slice of life investigating with the SSS at the start of Buying Time. But this is where you dig into the family behind her. And this is what, this is what we'd all been waiting for after the Anne Kelso stuff ended, because obviously we got the Kingdom connection, but we didn't know how that worked. And we do see how she fits into the Kingdom family here then, and we get to meet another Kingdom in the form of Merrick, who is brilliant. Really, really lovely character. Very clearly loves Anya dearly, even if that's not reciprocated. And I think Kevin McNally is a brilliant actor, and I always love hearing him turn up in Big Finish because he is always just such a joy to listen to. This is great. You get that really nice. Yeah, it's a lovely character piece for Anya. You get to see how her family has affected her and how that has driven her. Like she looks up to Brett and Sarah. Very much as her role models, but her whole family seems to be connected into the SSS, and it's good to get that sort of motivation for why Anya's in it and why she's still in it after the events of the Syndicate Master Plan, because it runs much deeper than just it runs very deeply in her sort of familial history. So that's brilliant. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic episode. It's very, very, very rare for one of the Dalek Universe stories to put a foot wrong. This one doesn't at all. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of those episodes that definitely prioritizes character work over sort of the adventure that's going on. We have got some pretty solid adventure going on stuff. It's got a very decent story that, it's not the biggest story ever, but what isn't there in story is there with character, and I think it's something we really needed for Anya at this stage. Mansoor, what are your thoughts on it?
I like it's a good story in its own right, but I like the way it builds out the Kingdom family, and felt like not every single thing needs to be turned into a spin-off, but that building up of the family history and those dynamics, it felt like there was something there that was rich enough to do like another Doctorless Dalek spin-off, or just a spin-off focused on the family. I feel like there's there's enough there to, even if you didn't have Sarah or Brett involved, there's enough there now with the kingdoms to revisit and dip back into. So that's always nice that, even if it's not necessarily all followed up on, just to have a bit more depth to the worlds that they're building up. And yeah, I don't have much more to say on it, but in terms of anything else that stood out, but yeah, just like a lot of Dark Universe performances are really strong. It's sort of the pacing for this whole series is really good. I think it like rattles along, and the cliffhangers help with that. It never feels like it. Well, we'll get onto it with like the Lost is like a good kind of more introspective story, but it walks that right balance between like keeping the pace up, but also having each episode be its own distinct thing with a sort of specific location or plot or theme. So yeah, I think it does serialize storytelling really well. In a way that Doctor Who's tried a lot of different things on screen and in Big Finish, and this is like quite a nice middle ground for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the whole series, as you say, is paced incredibly well, and I think just at the end of this first set, this is the perfect point to just kind of have that little breather to just sort of establish a few things. And a lot of stuff that's established here is kind of picked up in The Lost, in the next set, which, there is a little cameo from Merrick, and the stuff about the Doctor knowing Brett and Sarah kind of comes out, and there's quite a lot here that is paid off later, and that's really well done. Another thing just worth mentioning, just because I absolutely love it, is the Doctor's absolute disgust at having to travel by conventional spaceship. There's no TARDIS at all in this series. One of the whole big points of it is the Doctor has lost the TARDIS. And I love the 10th Doctor in particular. I just love his reaction to having to wait in a spaceport and get a normal spaceship and basically be ordinary. It's an awful lot of fun. We'll move on to set number 2 then. So the cliffhanger at the end of this one is basically, if I remember correctly, the ship's running out of oxygen. And it leads us into Cycle of Destruction, which is the first story of the second set. So we get a little bit more about Mark here. Now, we've not really discussed Mark all that much, although obviously he's been as central to the whole thing as Anya here. He's another companion in this whole run. And I'm glad that we do get a Mark episode as well. I guess it's Mark's equivalent of House of Kingdom, really, this episode is. So, Connor, talk to us about it.
Well, in the way the House of Kingdom digs into Anya's family history, this one digs into Mark's. And it sort of transpires that Mark has two families. There was a human family who sort of raised him and, helped him develop his own self, I suppose, and his own sense of individuality. We get some flashbacks to his mum in particular, and the last time he saw her, which it's played in a really heartbreaking way. Actually, it's really well done. But we then also discover his android family and sort of the place he was built and developed, as well. Then. Yeah, it's a wee bit of a strange story because you've got these androids sort of learning. They obviously want to live independently in the way that Mark has done so, but haven't been allowed to, and they have their sort of constraints built in. And it goes into a lot of how it plays about with the idea of how an artificial intelligence learns and sort of develops by mirroring biological beings. And it goes into what happens when it's not humans they're mirroring, but rather the animal life outside the facility here. It's a really great character piece for Mark and focuses in very strongly on him. to its credit, because on paper there's not an awful lot to Mark, and it's very welcome to get this development for him. I really like that. It's good to hear him playing off against others of his own kind, in the form of Mariah 6, another android, Mark's sister, I suppose. Yeah, it's great just to get these two character focused stories back to back, just to develop up the companions here a bit. I think it works very, very well. And it's at least as strong as the House of Kingdom. I'd say, I'd maybe say House of Kingdom is probably the stronger out of the two. I think certainly we feel, because we've got the history with Anne Kelso and Anya, I think, we as listeners maybe feel a little more invested in her. But this works wonders for Mark, and I think it works very, very well.
I think it's important that we get a bit about Mark as a character, particularly with what happens going on through the series, but also, he is being treated, particularly at this stage, as another companion. It's not like he's another character that's tagging along with the Doctor and the companion. He's not I guess a Mickey or whatever. He is one of this sort of makeshift, not quite TARDIS team of 3. So yeah, I'm really glad that we do get this episode. Mansoor, talk to us about Cycle of Destruction.
I agree that this and also like the next episode, that they do a lot to flesh out Mark and make us care more about him. Not that you don't care, but I think it's like I say, the comparison to Anya, there's a lot more to latch onto for her. So I feel like without what we have in this box set for Mark, he would have, to me, felt like a bit more of a secondary companion. On paper, he's around as pretty much as much as Anya in the first box set, but it really feels like she's our focus. But yeah, I think these when we get to this point in the run, this really cements Mark as, no, this is one of our main characters that we're following and caring about. And it, again, the serialization works quite well, of having a distinct whole story, but then that leads very directly into the next one as well. So yeah, I enjoyed the start to this second box set very much.
So we've kind of got all 3 members of this TARDIS team fully established with a background and everything now. So naturally, we're going to kill one of them in the Trojan Dalek, which is the next episode. Now, I kind of saw this coming, I have to admit. I think by this stage we'd had details for the 3rd set, so we kind of saw that Mark wasn't going to be in it, which kind of led us to think, oh dear, something not great's going to happen to him. Trojan Dalek, so halfway through, and we get a Dalek story in Dalek Universe. A lot of people whinged about that, apparently. A lot of people complained that there weren't enough Daleks in it from the beginning, but it's called Dalek Universe, not Dalek in every episode universe. And I quite like the fact that they've not been entirely held back. They sort of popped up a little bit in the first set, but I'm kind of glad they got properly held back to this point. And Trojan Dalek is perhaps not the most original story ever to come out of Big Finish, but it's a certain type of story done very well, I think, which is basically mad scientist thinks that he can do Daleks. We've had it in Blood of the Daleks. We've had it in various other things as well. We kind of have a version of it in the Juggernauts. But this is a really good way of doing this story, and obviously the consequences are massive. It's a pretty gruesome story as well, in terms of sort of where these Daleks come from, and what happens to other characters and that kind of thing. So it's a very, very heavy listen, this one. It's everything so far has been not necessarily light-hearted, but this certainly takes us into darker territory now. So, Connor, talk to us about the Trojan Dalek.
So this is an interesting one because I have a slight problem with it, and it's not through any fault of the episode itself. I think it's a great episode. It is, as you say, it's very similar territory to Blood of the Daleks, and it does feel like I remember listening to this at the time and thinking, "Oh, this is Blood of the Daleks." It's very similar to that, but that's a good story. It's a good type of story, and this is it done well. So I've no problem. I don't have any problem with that. I think the shock twist, which to me was a shock twist, like I do think I do remember my jaw actually dropping open when I heard Mark get exterminated. And that's down to Tennant's performance. Because he plays it, he's absolutely horrified. You get straight away, you feel the 10th Doctor's pain at losing another companion. Like that is it's actually a really visceral feeling for me anyway when I'm listening to the Trojan Dalek, because you feel the Doctor's world just collapse in on him again. I think my problem with this is as I say, it's not down to any of those elements because it's a great story. I think it works extremely well. I think it's a problem with the series in that I think one more episode between this and Cycle of Destruction would have let it breathe a little bit more. It feels very, very... The pacing of this series feels relentless because there's only 9 episodes in which to squeeze all of this blockbustery goodness, as I said earlier. But it's... I think coming so swiftly after Mark getting the development in Cycle of Destruction that he sort of needed, to killing him off in this story, it feels like it moves very quickly, and it feels like maybe one more episode in there just to let things breathe a little more would have helped immeasurably. So that's my only criticism of this story, is that I think it comes too soon after Cycle of Destruction to kill Mark off. I think one more episode just to let things breathe a little would have helped. But I know they only had 3. I know they only had a limited number of episodes, to work with. So I can't complain too much about that. It's a great story. As I said, I think Tennant's performance at the end and that of Joe Sims and Jane Slavin helps to sell everything. It really is the Doctor's hurt and pain and horror at losing another companion. It's amazing how well those 3 actors settled into each other's company. I suppose it feels at this stage like Mark and Anya and the Doctor are a really settled, team. Like like you get that straight away after the first set, I think, and then it builds throughout Cycle of Destruction and through this, and you get that ripped all apart at the end of the Trojan Dalek. Then, I think they all did a fantastic job of establishing themselves as a trio throughout this. They are each, it's an understatement to call David Tennant a wonderful actor, but Jane Slavin and Joe Sims are incredibly good as well. And I love how established and how well integrated this trio feels. As I was going to say, a TARDIS crew. They're technically not a TARDIS crew, but as our 3 leads, they feel really well integrated together. So I think it's that makes Mark's death work so well, and their performances in selling that at the very end of this. It's a great episode, and it does help to give the series a new direction. Because this ends the whole hunt of them looking for Arborek to try and get the Doctor back to the future. This does not, that's a dead end here. Arborek's dead. This helps then straight away to twist the series in a new direction, and comes at the perfect time to provide that new motivation going forwards.
I completely agree with you about wishing we had more time with this team. The 3 of them they did work together so well, and it's mad to think that this is actually only their 5th episode together. and already it's sort of been taken apart. I wish there were 4 sets here, and I wish we had time for some everyday adventures, I guess. But it's just, unfortunately, it's not happened. We've got the big series opener where the Doctor turns up and all the stuff with the Nun happens, and then we're straight into an Anya's family episode, then we're straight into a Mark's family episode, and then Mark dies. It all happens really, really quickly, and I absolutely love that pacing. I love the fact that absolutely every single episode of this series is essential. Like, you couldn't take away anything from all 9 episodes. You could not remove one of them. But I kind of wish we did maybe have 3 episodes where they just kind of go and do normal Doctor Who things. But there are so many things we could say this about. We said this about Anne Kelso, wouldn't it have been great if we'd have got a third set in the middle with Anne Kelso where we just get to have some normal Doctor Who adventures with her, because we only really got 1 or 2 outside of the series arc. But yeah, Mansoor, you talked to us about the Trojan Dalek.
I can see that about a bit of breathing room and just having some regular adventures. Just as a counterpoint to that, I'd rather a story be slightly too short and rattle through than be too long and outstay its welcome. So if you're going to go, one side of that line, I think it's better to err on the side of being concise and telling the story in a really tight way. I think the dynamics between the team that we've mentioned do work really well, and I think I'm right in thinking that at least at some point early in development, Dalek Universe was an idea for a completely different Doctor. So I don't know how much truth there was to that, or how early in the process things changed, but I think it's a credit to the story that it feels like this was very mindfully written for this team, and that team works really well. The death itself works in a number of ways. It's not just like a shock thrown in for the sake of it. It fits within this story, within Dalek Universe, like you said, moving things on. But then I think also connects to all the other stuff. Like there's mentions of Rose and Dollar and where the 10th Doctor is, emotionally at this point in his life, and then it obviously connects back to and echoes stuff with losing Sarah Kingdom, and that comes up again explicitly in the next story. So it doesn't feel shoehorned in, it doesn't feel gratuitous, and I feel like quite the opposite. It works on a number of levels in this story and in relation to other stuff beyond it. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this one.
It's definitely the big pivotal episode in the middle, the one that does turn the whole series on its head, and it's a good couple of episodes yet before we kind of realise what the full impact of the events here are. At this point of listening, it's just, Mark's being killed, and that's adding a bit more guilt, I guess, to the 10th Doctor, who seems to be carrying more than enough of it anyway, because this is towards the end of his life. So in various ways, he's lost and destroyed the lives of Rose, Martha, and Donna and their families. But it just kind of it's another sort of real emotional gut punch, and it works incredibly well. I think it is sort of the perfect thing just to kind of turn this series on its head, change the dynamic quite a bit, and the next episode kind of lets us deal with that and deal with other things, and it's a very, very sort of solid episode. The Lost is. It's a great, slow-paced, not too heavy, emotional piece that lets the Doctor and Anya kind of really have it out in some ways. There's a really interesting villain. There's a really interesting set of ideas behind this, and it could be argued that this story features one of the best covers that Big Finish have ever done. So, Connor, talk to us about The Lost.
It's phenomenal. It's absolutely one of the highlights of the whole run. As you say, before you even go into the story itself, it's surely one of the very best covers they've ever done. Very very striking. The story itself is superb. I actually forgot going into it that there was actors in it other than David Tennant and Jane Slavin, because they carry the bulk of the story. I forgot Joe Sims was in it, and I forgot that I forgot Kevin McNally came back as well. So it's great when they turn up in the form of Lost, who's it really jumped out when I was listening this time that this is so similar to Wild Blue Yonder. It's actually ridiculous. It has a very similar sort of villain. Lost is very similar to the no things or the not things from Wild Blue Yonder. And it really jumps out when Tennant is playing Lost to Anya at one stage, because his performance is very similar to that of the no thing he plays in Wild Blue Yonder. So it's fantastic, and it sort of digs into the conflict that is sort of bubbling away just under the surface between the Doctor and Anya, as far as their history goes, and as far as Anne Kelso goes. And I do like they take chunks out of her at different, they take chunks out of each other at different stages through this. They really both go for each other. Whenever Lost is sort of setting them up to play against each other, so it does feel quite brutal at digging into their relationship and the struggles within it. I like the little I like the little bit we're Lost in the form of Anne Kelso, and again, Jane Slavin does change her performance between Anya and Anne in this story. The version of Anne that is in here, in that Lost takes the form of. And you get that run through the list of all the companions that the Doctor has lost. And it feels very, very strange, but very welcome to hear people like Oliver Harper and Lucy Miller getting name checked alongside the likes of Adric and Rose and Donna. So that's a huge plus to this, just to hear the 10th Doctor getting integrated into the Big Finish back catalogue as well. So yeah, it's a great story, and it finally, we get that reveal to Anya that the Doctor knew and was involved with the deaths of Brett and Sarah back in the Daleks master plan. So yeah, as I said at the start there, absolutely one of the best highlights of the whole Dalek Universe run. That does hark back not just to the Syndicate master plan, but right back into the Daleks master plan as well. So that's it. Again, it's one of those episodes that it really pays to do the homework and listen to Daleks master plan and the Syndicate master plan, and to do this as a run of 3 series.
Yeah, it's definitely a reward for a lot of listening. This episode is, and that we were talking earlier about this all tying into quite a lot of other Doctor Who, some fairly obscure Doctor Who, and the Big Finish, and that kind of thing. But this is the episode that really does kind of reward you for sticking with all of that and piecing it all together. When I re-listened to this, it was absolutely amazing. Just doing that. Mansoor, what about you? What are your thoughts on The Lost?
Yeah, very nice contrast to like what we've just come out of. Like if you compare what happened on TV when actually they did this better with Sarah. I was going to use the example of Adric, of how the TV series would do a companion death and then it would move on from it just way too fast, and there'd be the odd reference or two, but no real tackling of the emotional baggage that comes with that. But then I was thinking back, actually with Sarah, they did that a little bit with Stephen and the Doctor, acknowledging it a little bit more and taking a moment to move on from it. What so that's a really nice contrast to, like, we've had these big sort of explosive events, and then we have this more introspective, spooky, psychological story. There's a lot of similarities to Wild Blue Yonder, but in a good way. I mean, even just like the setup, like it's not the edge of the universe, but I think the Lost is set outside the universe or beyond. There's like some sort of different realm or place that they go to. So similarities, but I think enough that makes it distinct and still have its own identity. The performances are a big part of that, like just how David Tennant and Jane Slavin shift slightly, and it's the same thing that Catherine Tate and David Tennant did on screen, that without playing over the top villains, they are themselves, but just like slightly not quite right. And yeah, that's just all executed really well in the performances and the direction and editing. The way that you sort of pick up quite quickly that it's not them, but there's like enough of the real character in there to make it feel unsettling and to just give you that little bit of doubt. So I think all of that's done really well, and then as well as kind of being a nice contrast to the tone of the previous stories, again, like structurally, it works quite well within Dalek Universe. It's picking up on things that have been seeded a few episodes back about the Doctor not telling Anya about Sarah and Brett, and obviously just coming off the back of losing Mark as well, and kind of sets up. You have that kind of emotional confrontation between the two of them that sort of moves their relationship on a little bit, and also forces the Doctor to really, really engage with how he feels about Anya and Anne and all of that stuff as well. So really solid, evocative story in its own right, and again does a really good job of fitting within the overall narrative of this arc or this season.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a really, really strong end to the second set as well. We're 2/3 of the way through what is essentially one big story, really, at this point, and it's kind of really sunk the Doctor and Anya down low and made them question, the relationship. It's made the Doctor question things about himself, Anya question things about herself. It's such a great place to leave the two characters, and obviously we've got the hello sweetie cliffhanger at the end, which is obviously going to lead us to a river story, and we're going to pick that up in another episode that we'll record in the not too distant future. That is all we've got time for, though, so it's been great discussing sort of these first couple of sets. We'll come back, discuss the third set, and do kind of a nice little. We'll tie off the whole series with a bow. But in the meantime, I will say thank you and goodbye to Connor.
Thank you very much.
And thank you and goodbye to Mansoor.
Thank you.
And we will be back very soon for more podcasting. Goodbye now.